Have you ever had someone you trusted completely, someone you loved more than anyone in the world, humiliate you in front of hundreds of strangers? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of betrayal from the one person who was supposed to have your back no matter what? Well, that's exactly what my own sister did to me on Flight 892 from New York to Los Angeles. And what happened next would change our relationship forever. My name is Rachel, and this story is about the day my sister learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, but sometimes it means you get a front row seat to watch someone prove you completely wrong. It was a crisp October morning at JFK Airport, and I was running late. Not fashionably late, not oops, I hit traffic late, but genuinely panicked, sweating, running through the terminal with my bag falling apart kind of late. I had gotten the call at 5 a.m. Emergency pilot needed for the 9:15 flight to LAX. Captained. Morgan had suffered a heart attack the night before, and they needed an experienced first officer to step up as pilot in command. This was my shot. After 6 years of flying regional jets and smaller aircraft, this was my chance to captain a wide-body aircraft with 300 passengers. The Boeing 777 was my dream plane, and I had trained for months to get certified on it. But in my rush to get to the airport, I looked like I had crawled out of bed and thrown on whatever clothes I could find. Which, to be honest, is exactly what I had done. As I rushed through the terminal in my old Columbia University sweatshirt, messy ponytail, and sneakers that had definitely seen better days, I spotted a familiar figure in the first-class boarding line. My heart should have lifted with joy, but instead, it sank into my stomach. It was my sister, Victoria. Victoria, who worked in marketing for some big fashion company. Victoria, who had never missed a manicure appointment in her life. Victoria, who had spent our entire childhood reminding me that I was the weird sister who cared more about airplanes than boys. Victoria, who was currently dressed like she was heading to a board meeting in Milan, complete with designer luggage and jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. For a split second, I thought about going over to say hi. We hadn't seen each other in 3 months, and despite our differences, she was still my sister. But before I could make a decision, she saw me first. Oh my God. Her voice carried across the boarding area, loud enough for everyone in first class to hear. Rachel, what are you doing here? And why do you look like that? Every head in the vicinity turned toward me. The businessman next to her chuckled. A woman with perfect hair and a Chanel bag actually wrinkled her nose in disgust. I felt my cheeks burning as I approached her, hoping she'd lower her voice. Victoria, hey, I'm working today. I got called in last minute. Working? She interrupted, looking me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Rachel, you can't be serious. You look like you slept in a bus station. Are you seriously about to get on a plane looking like that? The people around us were openly staring now. I could see phones being pulled out, probably to record what was clearly going to be some kind of scene. My sister had always been dramatic, but this was a new level of cruel, even for her. Victoria, please, I whispered, trying to keep my voice down. Can we talk about this privately? Privately? She laughed, the sound sharp and mean. Rachel, everyone can see you. You're embarrassing yourself. And honestly, you're embarrassing me too. She turned to the businessmen next to her, as if they were old friends. This is my little sister. She thinks she's going to be a pilot someday. Cute, right? The businessman smiled indulgently. Oh, that's sweet. Flight attendant training? God, I hope so, Victoria said, rolling her eyes. Though honestly, looking at her right now, I'm not sure any airline would hire her for anything. Rachel, seriously, what happened to you? Did you give up on everything we talked about? Remember when I told you that presentation matters? That people judge you in the first 3 seconds of meeting you? I stood there, frozen, as my own sister continued to tear me down in front of a crowd of strangers. This was the same sister who used to build blanket forts with me when we were kids. The same sister who helped me with my math homework and drove me to my first flying lesson when I was 16. But somewhere along the way, success had changed her. Or maybe it had just revealed who she really was. You know what? Victoria continued, her voice getting louder and more dramatic. I used to brag about having a sister who was going to be a pilot. I thought it was so cool, so inspiring. But looking at you now, I'm honestly embarrassed to be related to you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, passengers were recording everything, probably thinking they were witnessing some kind of family meltdown that would go viral on social media. The gate agent was walking over, clearly concerned that this scene was disrupting the boarding. "Process. Ma'am," the gate agent said to Victoria. "We need to keep the boarding line moving." Victoria flashed her perfect smile. "Of course. Sorry about that. My sister here is just having some life issues." She looked at me one more time, shaking her head with disappointment. "Rachel, maybe you should consider a different career path. Something more realistic. This whole pilot thing isn't working out for you." As she walked onto the plane with her designer luggage and her perfect posture, I stood there in the boarding area, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. The other passengers filed past me, some still whispering about what they had just witnessed. A few shot me sympathetic looks, but most just seemed uncomfortable to be near the family drama. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from the flight operations manager. "Rachel, you're cleared for boarding. Proceed directly to the cockpit. Captain's uniform is waiting for you in the crew rest area. Good luck." I looked up at the gate agent, who was watching me with curiosity. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I'm First Officer Richardson. I need to board." "Now!" Her expression changed completely. You're the backup pilot?" "Yes, ma'am. Emergency call-in." As I walked down the jet bridge toward the aircraft, my heart was pounding with a mixture of humiliation and determination. My sister had just destroyed me in front of hundreds of people. She had questioned my abilities, my appearance, my entire life's work. She had treated me like I was some kind of failure, some disappointment she was ashamed to be associated with. But in about 3 minutes, when I walked onto that flight deck and took control of a 777 with 300 lives on board, she was going to learn something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Never underestimate your little sister, especially when she's about to become your captain. The final revelation. 20 minutes later, as Flight 892 pushed back from the gate, I made the announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rachel Morrison speaking from the flight deck. Due to a medical emergency with our scheduled captain, I'll be serving as your pilot in command for today's flight to Los Angeles." The silence from the cabin was deafening. Then, slowly, I heard my sister's voice, barely a whisper but carrying clearly in the quiet cabin. That's impossible. We're expecting a smooth flight today with clear skies and calm winds. Our flight time will be approximately 5 hours and 30 minutes. Sit back, relax, and thank you for flying with us." As we climbed through 10,000 feet, Jessica, the lead flight attendant, came to the cockpit. "Captain, there's a passenger in first class asking if she can speak with you. Says she's your sister?" I smiled, my hands steady on the controls as we soared through the clouds. "Tell her I'm a little busy right now, but she's welcome to wait until after we land if she'd like to apologize." 6 hours later, after the smoothest landing I'd ever executed, Victoria was waiting for me at the gate. Her perfect makeup was smeared from crying, and her designer composure was completely gone. "Rachel," she whispered as I walked past in my captain's uniform. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "Victoria, I forgive you, but I want you to remember something. The next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, ask yourself if maybe you're the one who doesn't understand where you are." I walked away, my captain's bars gleaming under the terminal lights, leaving behind the sister who had mocked me and the 299 other passengers who had learned that day that heroes don't always look like what you expect them to look like. Sometimes they look like messy girls in old sweatshirts who just happen to have the skills to fly you safely across the country. And sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person you need most when your life is in their hands. As I walked onto the aircraft, still in my civilian clothes, I could feel every pair of eyes in first class following me. The crew rest area was just behind the cockpit, but to get there, I had to walk through the entire first class cabin. And there, in seat 3A, sat Victoria, looking like she belonged on the cover of Vogue magazine. She saw me coming and her face immediately flushed with embarrassment, not because she felt bad about what she'd done, but because she was mortified that other passengers might connect her to me. As I passed her row, she actually turned her head away and pretended to be deeply interested in the safety card, but the businessman sitting next to her wasn't about to let it go. "Excuse me," he said loud enough for several rows to hear. "Wasn't that the girl you were talking to earlier? The one with the situation?" Victoria's perfectly manicured hand flew to her forehead. "Please," she whispered, "can we not discuss this right now? It's complicated." "Family drama?" asked the woman across the aisle, clearly enjoying the gossip. I saw the whole thing at the gate. Quite the scene. I could hear every word as I made my way toward the cockpit, and each comment felt like another weight on my chest. These people were treating my personal humiliation like entertainment. My own sister had given them permission to mock me, and now they were running with it. In the crew rest area, I found my captain's uniform hanging perfectly pressed and ready. As I changed clothes, I could hear the boarding continuing outside, passengers settling in, flight attendants making their preparations. But I could also hear the continued whispers about that girl and speculation about what my story was. Jessica knocked on the door as I was adjusting my captain's bars. "First Officer Richardson, we're ready for your pre-flight briefing." "Actually," I said, opening the door in my full uniform, "it's Captain Richardson today. And yes, let's do that briefing." Jessica's eyes went wide. She looked me up and down, clearly trying to reconcile the professional pilot standing in front of her with the messy girl who had walked through her cabin just minutes earlier. You're the emergency captain?" "That's right." "Is there a problem?" No problem at all, Captain. It's just, you look so young. And earlier, when you boarded, you looked different," I supplied with a slight smile. "Yes, I imagine I did. Emergency calls don't usually come with time to get ready for a fashion show." As we walked toward the cockpit for the briefing, I could see passengers in first class doing double takes. The businessman who had been gossiping with Victoria was staring openly, his mouth slightly agape. A few people were whispering urgently to each other, trying to figure out if their eyes were playing tricks on them. But Victoria looked like she was going to be sick. Her perfect composure was cracking as she watched me walk past in my captain's uniform, epaulets gleaming, wings pinned proudly to my chest. The same sister she had just publicly humiliated was now wearing the uniform of someone who outranked every single person on that aircraft. During the safety briefing, I noticed several flight attendants stealing glances at me. Word was spreading quickly among the crew about the situation with the passenger who had turned out to be their captain. Jessica kept shooting apologetic looks in my direction, clearly worried about how she had treated me earlier. But the real moment of truth came when it was time for the captain's announcement. I picked up the intercom, knowing that my voice was about to reach every single person who had witnessed my humiliation just 30 minutes earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rachel Richardson speaking from the flight deck. I want to personally welcome you aboard Flight 892 with non-stop service to Los Angeles." In the first-class cabin, I could practically hear the sound of jaws dropping. The businessman was frantically tapping his seatmate's arm. Victoria had gone, completely white, and was gripping her armrest like her life depended on it. "Due to a medical emergency with our originally scheduled captain, I'll be serving as your pilot in command today. I know some of you may have seen me boarding earlier, and I want to assure you that despite my casual appearance at that time, you're in excellent hands." I paused, letting that sink in. Through the cockpit door, I could hear the unmistakable sound of my sister's sharp intake of breath. I've been flying commercially for 6 years, with over 3,500 flight hours, including extensive experience on the Boeing 777. I'm rated for all weather conditions and emergency procedures. Most importantly, I want every passenger on this aircraft to know that their safety is my absolute highest priority. Another pause. I was definitely enjoying this more than I should have been. We'll be cruising at 41,000 feet today with an estimated flight time of 5 hours and 28 minutes. Weather looks excellent all the way to Los Angeles, so we're expecting a very smooth ride. I could hear movement in the cabin. Passengers shifting in their seats, whispered conversations starting up. But I wasn't done yet. Before we begin our taxi to the runway, I want to share something with you. About 30 minutes ago, in the boarding area, I overheard some comments about my appearance, my qualifications, and my fitness to be on this aircraft. At the time, I chose not to respond because I believed my actions would speak louder than my words. The cabin had gone dead silent. Even the engine noise seemed quieter. I want everyone on this flight to understand something. You never know who you're talking to. You never know what someone has sacrificed, what they've overcome, or what they're capable of achieving. The person you judge in the boarding line might be the same person responsible for getting you safely to your destination. Through the cockpit door, I heard my sister's voice barely audible. Oh God, what have I done? But the real shock was yet to come. Because what these passengers didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, we were going to encounter the kind of emergency that would test every single skill I had learned in my 6 years of flying. And the sister who had mocked me was about to watch me perform a miracle that would be talked about in aviation circles for years to come. As I taxied toward the runway, I made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. We're cleared for takeoff, and I promise you, this is going to be a flight you'll never forget. What I didn't tell them was that I was right for reasons none of us could have imagined. My sister mocked me on the plane. Seconds later, I saved 300 lives. We had been airborne for exactly 43 minutes when my worst nightmare became reality. We were cruising smoothly at 41,000 feet. The Rocky Mountains spread out like a beautiful carpet below us when the master caution light suddenly illuminated on my instrument panel. Then came the sound that every pilot dreads, the sharp, insistent beeping of a system failure alarm. Engine fire, engine 2, my first officer, David, called out, his voice tight with controlled panic. I looked at the engine display and my blood ran cold. Engine number 2 was showing fire warnings, and the temperature readings were climbing into the red zone. This was bad, really bad, but I had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times in the simulator. Engine fire checklist, I called, out calmly, my hands already moving to the appropriate controls. Auto throttle off. Engine 2, throttle closed. As we began the emergency procedures, I could feel the aircraft shuddering as I shut down the burning engine. A Boeing 707 can fly on one engine, but we were over the mountains, carrying a full load of fuel and passengers, and now we needed to find a place to land immediately. David, get me Denver Control. We need priority handling and emergency equipment. Denver Control, United 892, declaring emergency. We have an engine fire and are requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport. United 892, Denver Control. Understand you're declaring emergency. What's the nature of your emergency and souls on board? Denver Control. We have an engine fire on engine number 2. Fire is contained, but we need immediate approach clearance. We have 300 souls on board and are requesting emergency equipment on standby. United 892, roger. Turn left heading Zoainu, descend and maintain flight level 280. Emergency equipment will be standing by. Nearest suitable airport is Denver International, 47 miles to your east. But here's where things got really terrifying. As I began the turn toward Denver, I noticed something on my engine display that made my stomach drop. Engine number 1 was starting to show abnormal readings too. Temperature climbing, pressure dropping. We weren't just dealing with one failed engine. We were potentially looking at a double engine failure over the Rocky Mountains. David, I said quietly, look at engine 1 parameters. His face went pale as he saw what I was seeing. Captain, if we lose engine 1. We're not going to lose engine 1, I said firmly. But inside, I was calculating distances, glide ratios, and emergency landing sites. If both engines failed, we'd have maybe 15 minutes of gliding time to find somewhere to put this aircraft down safely. I keyed the intercom, knowing that my voice was about to reach 300 terrified passengers, including my sister. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richardson. We're experiencing a mechanical issue with one of our engines, and as a precautionary measure, we're diverting to Denver International Airport. I could hear the immediate reaction from the cabin, gasps, worried voices, someone crying. But I wasn't done. I want everyone to listen very carefully to your flight attendant's instructions. We're going to be making an emergency landing, which means fire trucks and emergency vehicles will be waiting for us as a standard safety procedure. This is normal protocol, and there's no immediate danger to anyone on board. Through the cockpit door, I could hear Jessica making announcements about emergency procedures, checking that everyone's seatbelts were fastened, preparing the cabin for what could potentially be a very rough landing. But then Engine 1 started, failing faster than I had anticipated. The temperature was spiking, and I was losing power rapidly. We were still 30 miles from Denver, flying over terrain that offered no good options for an emergency landing. Denver Control, United 892. We're now showing problems with both engines. We may not make it to Denver International. Do you have any closer options? United 892, stand by. The closest option is Jefferson County Airport, 15 miles southwest of your position, but it's a much shorter runway, 15 miles, with 2 failing engines and 300 people on board. I had maybe 8 minutes to make a decision that would determine whether everyone on this plane lived or died. David, what's the runway length at Jefferson County? 8,000 feet, Captain. It's tight for a 777, but doable if we come in clean and fast. I made the call that would define my entire career. Denver Control, United 892, requesting vectors to Jefferson County Airport. We're going to attempt a landing there. United 892? Are you sure? That runway is significantly shorter than recommended for your aircraft type. Denver Control, I'm sure. We don't have enough power to make it to Denver International. As I banked the aircraft toward Jefferson County, both engines finally gave up completely. The cabin went eerily quiet as the engine noise disappeared, replaced only by the sound of wind rushing past the aircraft. We were now a 300-ton glider, carrying 300 lives, with one shot at getting this right. I keyed the intercom one more time, my voice steady despite the fact that we were now in the most dangerous situation any pilot could face. Ladies and gentlemen, both engines have failed, but I want you to know that this aircraft is designed to glide safely for extended periods. We're going to be making an emergency landing at Jefferson County Airport in approximately 6 minutes. The bomb. Panic from the cabin was immediate and intense. I could hear people crying, praying, calling loved ones. But above it all, I heard my sister's voice clear and desperate. That's my sister flying this plane. That's my sister. For the next 6 minutes, I flew that aircraft with a precision I didn't know I possessed. Every control input had to be perfect. Too high and we'd overshoot the runway. Too low and we'd hit the mountains. Too fast and we'd run off the end of the runway. Too slow and we'd stall and crash. At 200 feet above the ground, I could see the runway ahead. It looked impossibly short for an aircraft our size, but it was our only option. Emergency vehicles were lined up along both sides, their lights flashing in the afternoon sun. David, call out airspeeds, 180 knots, 170, 160. The touchdown was the hardest part. With no engine power and a short runway, I had to get the aircraft on the ground quickly and then use every bit of braking and reverse thrust available to stop before we ran out of runway. We hit the pavement hard, harder than any commercial landing should be, but we were down. I deployed the speed brakes immediately and applied maximum braking pressure. The aircraft shuddered and groaned as we decelerated, eating up runway at an alarming rate. Come on, I whispered under my breath as the end of the runway approached rapidly. With just 500 feet of runway remaining, we finally stopped. The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause from the cabin. Not polite airplane clapping, genuine, emotional, life-affirming applause from 300 people who realized they had just cheated death. I sat in my seat for a moment, my hands still gripping the controls, hardly believing what had just happened. We had lost both engines over mountainous terrain and successfully landed at an airport that was barely long enough for our aircraft. Everyone was alive. Everyone was safe. As the emergency vehicles surrounded our aircraft and the evacuation slides deployed, I finally stood up and walked back into the cabin. The scene was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Passengers were hugging each other, crying with relief, thanking God and anyone else they could think of. But the moment that will stay with me forever was when I saw Victoria. She was standing in the aisle, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, and when she saw me approaching in my captain's uniform, she completely broke down. "Rachel," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me in front of everyone. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. You just saved my life. You saved all of our lives." She was shaking uncontrollably, holding on to me like I was the only solid thing. In a world that had just been turned upside down, the businessman who had been gossiping with her earlier was standing nearby, and when he saw me, he actually removed his hat. "Captain, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. And I owe you my life." One by one, passengers began approaching me. The woman with the Chanel bag who had wrinkled her nose at me earlier was crying as she thanked me. The people who had been recording my humiliation at the gate were now recording my praise, but this time with genuine admiration and respect. Ashley, one of the flight attendants who had treated me dismissively, was openly weeping. "Captain Richardson, I've never been more wrong about someone in my entire life. What you just did, that was a miracle." But the moment that meant the most came when a little girl, maybe 8 years old, tugged on my uniform jacket. "Are you really the pilot?" she asked with wide eyes. "I am," I said, kneeling down to her level. "My mommy says you're a hero." "Are you a hero?" I looked around at all the faces surrounding me, passengers who an hour ago had been laughing at me, judging me, treating me like I didn't deserve to share their air. Now they were looking at me like I had personally handed them their lives back. "No, sweetheart," I said to the little girl, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm just someone who refused to let other people's opinions define what I could accomplish." As the emergency slides were deployed and passengers began evacuating the aircraft, something beautiful happened that I'll never forget. Instead of the usual chaos and panic you'd expect in an emergency evacuation, people were taking their time to shake my hand, hug me, and thank me personally. The evacuation that should have taken 3 minutes stretched to 15 because nobody wanted to leave without expressing their gratitude. Victoria was the last passenger in first class, and she couldn't stop crying. "Rachel, I don't know how to apologize for what I did. I humiliated you. I questioned everything you've worked for. And then you saved my life." She was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "How do you forgive someone for something like that?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the successful marketing executive with the perfect life, but the scared little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Victoria, we're family. Family means we mess up. We hurt each other sometimes, but we also get second chances." "But I don't deserve a second chance," she whispered. "The things I said about you, the way I treated you in front of all those people—" "You're right," I said gently. "You don't deserve a second chance, but I'm giving you one anyway. Because that's what love looks like sometimes." The businessman who had been so cruel earlier was waiting by the emergency slide, and when he saw me approaching, he actually got down on one knee. "Captain Richardson, I need to say something, and I need everyone to hear it." His voice was shaking with emotion. 30 minutes ago, I was the worst kind of person. I judged you, I mocked you, I treated you like you were beneath me. And then, you saved my life." He stood up, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfect hair messed up from the evacuation. "I have a daughter your age, and if anyone ever treated her the way I treated you today, I'd want to punch them in the face. I'm ashamed of myself, and I'm grateful to you in ways I can't even express." As we reached the bottom of the slide, news. Crews were already arriving. Word had spread quickly about the emergency landing, and reporters were setting up cameras and trying to interview passengers. But something incredible was happening. Instead of talking about how scared they were, every single passenger was talking about their pilot. "She's a hero," one elderly man told a CNN reporter. "I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like what that young woman just did." We were making fun of her. Ashley, the flight attendant, admitted to another camera crew, tears still streaming down her face. "We judged her because of how she looked, and then she saved all of our lives. I'll never judge anyone again as long as I live." But the interview that would go viral and change everything came when Victoria spoke to a reporter from ABC News. "That pilot, Captain Richardson, she's my sister," Victoria said, her voice breaking with emotion. "And 2 hours ago, I stood in that boarding line and told her she was an embarrassment. I told her she should consider a different career. I made her feel like she was worthless in front of hundreds of people." The reporter looked shocked. "And then she saved your life?" "She saved everyone's life," Victoria continued, sobbing openly on camera. "My sister is the most incredible person I know, and I spent my morning trying to tear her down. She had every right to hate me, every right to never speak to me again. But instead, she risked her own life to save mine. 3 days later, that interview had been viewed over 10 million times. Tuzzer Captain Richardson was trending on every social media platform. The FAA issued a commendation for my handling of the emergency. United Airlines offered me a promotion to senior captain, and airlines across the country started reaching out with job offers, but the moment that meant the most to me came a week later, when Victoria showed up at my apartment with a gift. It was a framed photo of us as kids, building model airplanes, in our backyard, with an inscription she had written, "To my hero sister, who taught me that dreams don't have dress codes. I'm sorry I forgot that, and I'm proud of who you've become." 6 months later, Victoria changed careers. She left her high-paying marketing job and started a nonprofit organization called Never Judge that works to combat appearance-based discrimination. She speaks at schools and corporate events, telling the story of how her pilot sister taught her the most important lesson of her life. Today, I'm the youngest female captain in United Airlines history. I fly international routes, commanding some of the largest aircraft in the sky. But more importantly, I've learned that sometimes the biggest challenges in life aren't technical problems or emergency situations. Sometimes, the biggest challenge is believing in yourself when everyone else is telling you that you're not enough. The passengers on Flight 892 learned that day that heroes don't always look like what you expect. They learned that the person you underestimate might be the person who saves your life. And they learned that judging someone by their appearance is not just cruel. It's stupid. My sister learned that success without kindness is meaningless, and that the people who love you most are sometimes the ones who hurt you deepest. But she also learned that forgiveness is possible, even after the worst betrayal. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at people who hurt you. Sometimes the best revenge is being so undeniably excellent at what you do that they have no choice but to recognize your greatness. Every time I put on my captain's uniform now, every time I hear Captain Richardson over the intercom, I remember that morning when my own sister tried to tear me down. But I also remember that by the end of that day, she was telling the world that I was her hero. Because that's what happens when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your reality. That's what happens when you turn your pain into purpose, your humiliation into motivation, and your biggest critic into your biggest supporter. Flight 892 lasted 5 hours and changed 300 lives forever. But for me, it was the day I stopped caring what anyone thought about how I looked and started focusing entirely on how excellently I could perform when it mattered most. That's my story. That's how my sister's mockery became my greatest triumph. And that's how I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up being the ones who help you discover just how strong you really are. Thanks for watching until the end. If this story inspired you to never judge someone by their appearance, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible revenge stories. Until next time, remember, you never know who you're really talking to.